First, we want to start with a very quick land acknowledgement. And so, with gratitude, mutual respect, and reciprocity, we acknowledge the ancestral home, culture, and oral teachings of the Treaty 7 signatories, which include Siksika, Pikanai, Ganai, the Ithaca Stony Nakota, consisting of Chickasee, Bears Paw, and Good Stony bands, and the people of Tsuut'ina Nation. We also recognize the Métis people of Alberta Region 3, who call Treaty 7 their home. We respect all people who share, celebrate, and care for Treaty 7 territory of Southern Alberta, and we honor the original caretakers of the land who remind us of the ongoing histories that precede us. We recognize our shared responsibilities going forward to help bring everyone together on this journey of truth and reconciliation. And so we'd like to thank all of you for coming, as I said. And before I pass it to Teresa, we'd like to thank our project funders. That includes Canadian Race Relations Foundation, the Government of Alberta Multiculturalism and Anti-Racism Grant, and all the partners associated, SUPRE with Calvin Hwang, who is with us tonight, and the Calgary Korean Women's Association, and of course, ACCT Foundation. So passing it over to Teresa. I stand corrected. We're going to start the film.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Teresa Woo-Paw. I'm the chair of the ACT Foundation, which was formed in 2017 with a focus on advancing Chinese Canadian civic engagement and leadership development, building community capacity and resources, furthering education on racial equality of minorities, including Chinese Canadians. The ACT Foundation helped to convene the ACT to End Racism, which stands for Asian Canadians Together, ACT to End Racism Network, in April 2020 in an effort to challenge the attack on Dr. Teresa Tam at the time. 30 organizations from across the country came together during the pandemic and to try to create a collective voice and propel our institutions and civic leaders to respond to the resurgence of anti-Asian racism in Canada at that time. And the network's mission is to fight racism while in solidarity with other racialized groups such as Black and Indigenous communities. I'm not going to go into too much about the work of the network today, but through the members of the network now have a membership of about 55 organizations across the country, met faithfully for 24 months every Monday to try to coordinate our efforts to respond to anti-Asian racism. And it was through some of those virtual Zoom meetings that I met Kelvin. And I trust you agree with me that the film that we just watched together deserves all the recognitions and accolades that it has received. I believe it encapsulated the impacts and journey of the racialized Canadians' experience with racism, the effect of the incident on the victim's social and emotional well-being, as well as the healing process. It is poignant and informative. And you know what? I think this is the 4th time I watched it in preparation to moderate today. I watched it 2 days ago, and I almost cried again. So it's a really well done film. Thank you, Kelvin. It is my pleasure to moderate the interactive panel dialogue this evening. And I'm looking forward to, it's such a privilege for me to play this role so that I can process a little bit of my work over the past 3 years. And I know that you will enjoy a dialogue with this very dynamic panel today. And also, I look forward to your input and participation this evening, but because I can identify many familiar faces here today. You are leaders in the community. You're leaders in our institution, in our organizations here in Calgary. You have been doing this, some of you have been doing this work for decades. So we look forward to learning about your experience and insights and have a conversation with our panelists. So I would like to now invite, we did not rehearse, so I guess my panelists are still sitting over there. So I'm going to invite the panel to now take their seat here with all these colorful chairs. So like I said, so you want to mix the gender mix? Very good, Cesar.
Thank you.
So now you know we have a very experienced, dynamic panel. A moving, powerful, and informative documentary have helped to set the context and stage for our dialogue this evening. Like I said earlier, this panel discussion is very much designed as a dialogue amongst our community, with all of you here, with the panel, representative of a range of experiences and perspectives on the topic of anti-Asian hate and mental health. I'll start with, it's going to be, Calvin just told me about half an hour ago that this is the format. I'm over here. So I realized that it'll make it easy for me to cut you guys off when I have to, because I'm not amongst you. So anyways, I will start with Calvin Hwang, the filmmaker, and then the panelists. I'll make brief introductions of our panelists as they start to respond to the questions or comments. I've said enough about having you participate, so I think without further ado, I will start the dialogue with the person behind this moving, powerful, and informative documentary, Calvin Hudson Hwang, filmmaker with SUPRE, a Canadian production company which applies storytelling to health issues, inspiring positive attitudes and actions. So ACCT Foundation is very pleased to work in collaboration with Calvin in hosting the screening of What Flowers They Bloom in Edmonton 2 days ago, today in Calgary, and later this summer in Fredericton. So Calvin, let's start with you, sharing with us the genesis for making this documentary and the expected outcomes you have for this screening and the dialogue tonight.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for the kind intro, Teresa. Can everyone hear me? Am I projecting? Yeah. This film came at a time when I think as filmmakers we're kind of shut down, and our industry pretty much closed up during the pandemic. And for a lot of us as filmmakers and storytellers, we felt compelled to, how do we help drive more awareness? And in particular with storytelling, how do we drive more empathy to people who are experiencing increased levels of racism? And for me, where we saw this being reported quite well in the news and in the statistics, I don't think we felt a strong point of view of what this meant for the experience as well as the impact on health and mental health for the victims of racism. And so through this project and through knowing Andy, whose flower shop is in my neighborhood in Toronto, and hearing about some of his stories, I had proposed this to Heritage Canada. And as part of their program that was trying to support more education and action towards increasing greater understanding, not just of racism, but also our increased infodemic around misinformation and its incredible power of disrupting the cohesion of our communities. They were kind enough to jury our proposal and award us with a grant to film this. And so that's how, as a filmmaker, we felt that we could contribute to this cause in a meaningful way and shine a light into the actual human experience to really humanize the Asian community as fellow citizens in the community with all different groups. So that's kind of how I came into this project. You asked about measurement. So as our obligation to any funding, we did provide a report that, interestingly, not just talked about our reach, frequency, and the quality of response to patrons, but it also allowed us to understand, when we put the film on social media, where some of the sources of disinformation and online hate were coming from. So through that, we were able to identify pockets of communities where a lot of the negative sentiments were coming from, and hopefully provide some analysis around where educational emphasis could be put into those communities. So those were some of the ways that we measured and hopefully delivered some impact to help further those efforts. Hopefully that's not too long-winded.
Oh, you're lucky I did not time you. So, but I think you certainly, I think you agree with me that I think you have achieved your goal to produce an informative and very thought-provoking film that serve to amplify, the emotional impact of racism on one's well-being and also the community's well-being. And these are subject matters, racism and mental health, that are still very much stigmatized and taboo in many of the Asian Canadian communities. So thank you for producing a film that would raise that awareness in the Canadian society in general. And it's so very, very important. There have been days, I've lived in this country for 51 years, 95, 98%, well, maybe I should say 95, have been great days. But recently, I have entered into rooms where I felt no love. And so I'm afraid that these are issues which will continue to face us as a country, as a society, as a people for some time to come. So this film is giving us lots of food for thought and the context for ensuing the conversation with our panelists and all of you this evening. So I would like to now invite our first panelist, Dr. Conita Yip, a counselor and has obtained her PhD in social work with the University of Calgary, with specialization in immigrant mental health, and as well as utilization of health services by this population. Conita, please share with us your reflections or reaction to the film. Perhaps 1 to 2 areas of the film that particularly resonated with you, given your experience and expertise in mental health amongst Asian Canadians and issues of health access.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa, for the introduction. And good morning. Oh, sorry, good evening. Good evening, everyone. And well, actually, I would like to thank Calvin for directing this very meaningful, realistic, and thought-provoking documentary, and bringing this, I would say, underreported or hidden reality to the forefront. Yeah, and you know what? I was indeed greatly touched by Andy's story, and I was tearful when I just watched the documentary, and I think many of you did. And also how the people in the community were so proactive in offering a kind and empathetic hand to the victim. And when I previewed this documentary like a week ago, and I was trying to understand this documentary from the perspective of a wounded person, and as a bystander, and as a counselor. Yep. Also, I was trying to watch my feelings arising from each of these different roles. I think it's not uncommon for us, in one way or another, to have experienced some microaggressions in our daily encounters. There could be a lot of unpleasant emotional reactions, like Andy in the movie. It's like a mix of helplessness, fear, sadness, disappointment, despair, anxiety, anger, loss of trust, avoidance to go out, and it could end up in isolation and so on. Yeah. And these are totally understand then, because when we as immigrants, when we first arrived Canada, we call this place a new and dear home, actually. And we must have dreams and aspirations for ourselves, as well as for our next generations to come. And if the reality is unlike the way we thought and we expected, and our dreams and hopes were shaken. So my question is, what do we need to do differently on a personal level and on a community level in order to move on with our dreams and hopes and positively? And so as a bystander, I could also feel the same complex feelings the victim did. I'm also worried I might be the next target. You know what, when during the pandemic, I was a little bit afraid of going out to the supermarket with my little boy. and other than worrying about being the next target, and I could even blame myself for not being able to do anything for the victim. So it's like another kind of trauma. Yeah. And as a counselor, I have a role to listen and help my victimized clients being able to name and to describe their emotional distress and their experiences, and help them understand that they actually have options as to how to respond and react, and that they are not alone. And I think healing all starts with, I feel listened to, I feel heard, and I feel supported, like as in the case of Andy. And sometimes it's true, though a cruel reality, that we're building a caring, resilient, and inclusive community, and our sense of community through these collective traumatic experiences. Yeah. And I think it's actually common that the victims feel lonely and might think that I'm the only one, I'm the only person to have such unpleasant experiences. It's important to let them know as a counselor that we are not alone, and together we can do something to recover and build a better community. But again, like I said before, we easily tend to feel and easily tend to blame ourselves, like, did I do anything wrong that resulted in such discrimination? Yeah. And because of the fear, because of the self-doubt, and also because of the lack of knowledge as to where to get help and where to give my voice, we usually choose to remain silent. Yeah. And so what will be the result? And I think it's easy to understand that the negative, unpleasant emotions will grow and build up inside us, and which could, potentially lead to depression or anxiety. Yeah, these are the perspectives that I have, when I watch this movie.
Well, thank you, for Conita, for starting with your reflection and sharing your experience. I'm going to first maybe invite one of our panelists, perhaps to add your perspective, if you are open to it, Rosalind. So Rosalind is a social worker and also currently a regional coordinator with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. Now, I had the opportunity to work with Rosalind as the coordinator of the Act to End Racism Network during the pandemic. So she also actually had encountered a racist incident. And then through our work together, we also, I think, turned some of these personal experiences. So I included, I felt targeted, I felt, I was fearful, I prepared some messages in case I get racist slurs thrown at me when I walk in my neighborhood. So I went through all of that too as an Asian Canadian. So perhaps, Rosalind, you can share a little bit about your experience, your perspective in terms of being a target of racism, and then also perhaps react to some of the issues raised by Conita about the fear and trauma, and what is it that we can do about these experiences.
Yes, thank you, Teresa, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm also very grateful to Calvin for the film. I've also watched it several times, and of course it was triggering for me because I related to Andy's story at the beginning of COVID. I went to a grocery store, and this was a time when people weren't wearing masks, but I chose to wear a mask because I wanted to protect my family and friends, and had an encounter with an individual. And of course, my first response, as most people, is to be shocked and surprised, and really didn't know what to do. But the thing is, as Teresa mentioned, I was working with Teresa, and she had tasked me before to do some research on anti-racism responses. So I had been educated on it. I had gotten some tips, and I thought, I'm going to employ some of these strategies and see if it's effective or not. So when this person said this racial slur to me, the first thing I did was I thought, I'm going to try the first thing, which is direct confrontation. And I basically said to him, "Excuse me, what did you say?" And then it didn't work because it escalated. He got angrier at me. So then I thought, okay, I need to walk away from the situation. But what can I do next? And so the next thing I was, had been, I had read about was, report it. So I thought, I'm going to report this to the store manager. And I did, and the store manager was great in showing allyship and solidarity with me. She said, "Let's go find this guy." And so we did, and we confronted him. And of course, in front of her, he started to deny it vehemently, and say, I didn't do that, I didn't do this. And then I thought, what, I'm going to try the third tactic. I'm going to pull out my camera and I'm going to film him. So I did that, which is to document what happens to you. And I of course don't recommend that, all the time, but and of course if you feel safe, you can document, of course, right? But I did that, and of course he started to walk away. But as he walked away, he turned around and he said to me, he goes, "What are you going to do? You going to report me to the police?" And for a split second, I just thought, wow, like, he's right. I probably won't. I won't report it, because I was like, maybe it's a minor incident. Maybe police don't care. Nothing's going to happen. And maybe even worse, nobody's going to believe me. And I think that's what a lot of people think, and that's why a lot of people don't report. Stats actually show that only 1% of people who experience hate crimes report to the police. So that means 99% of people, that's almost everybody, right, don't report to police. And for a number of reasons, right, or don't report it at all. And so, he walked away, and then the store manager said to me, maybe we should get security to walk you to your car, because I don't think you're safe. So I ended up having security walk me to my vehicle. I've never had that happen in my life. I used to be a university safe walker. I used to walk people to their cars. Tables were turned this time, and it wasn't normal for me. But sure enough, he was outside waiting for me, and I definitely felt threatened. But I think, I think stories are super important, and that's why I feel like the power of storytelling and people sharing their stories is so important. Stats show that 2 out of 5 Asian Canadians who experience racism don't tell anybody. And in 2020, when COVID happened, anti-Asian racism spiked by 300%, and that's huge. So you think about the collective trauma that a community holds when people don't speak about what happens to them, right? And so I think the power of storytelling is that it empowers us as individuals. We need to share our stories with each other, or to speak to somebody, as Conita said, like, tell somebody, tell one person if you if you don't feel comfortable. But when you don't tell anybody, we don't realize the trauma that it inflicts on us. And what we now know in psychology is that reporting and telling somebody your story lessens that trauma. And so we have to encourage that reporting. And if you don't want to report to police, you can report to third-party reporting mechanisms. ACT10racism.ca has their own reporting site. It's a third-party reporting site. The Alberta Hate Crimes Committee has a stophateab.ca in this province to collect and document those stories. So I encourage people to report hate crimes and hate incidences.
Thank you, Rosalind, for sharing. And we actually turned her experience into a comic strip as a community resource and dubbed in 7 languages. So you can find it from the website. It's free for anyone to use. But I think Rosalind just reinforced, I think, the need for sharing the experiences for our own mental well-being, as well as for our community and our institutions to better understand the issues and be better able to address and respond to these issues. And of course, storytelling, tools such as this film is helping to get some of these messages out. So I'm going to open the floor up to see whether anyone in the audience would like to share, if you have questions or thoughts and comments around some of the points and concepts raised by Conita and Rosalind. Anyone wish to share some of the work that you are doing in your organization, in the community, your observation around the need for sharing experiences, around the stigmatization, some of the cultural barriers faced by some of these impacted communities? Okay, not at this point in time. Okay, Dolly?
Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to see a great turnout for this topic, which is a very timely topic. In my 47 years here in Canada, I don't know if I'm just fortunate or lucky, but I have never had any aggressive anti-racism act done against me. And I'm out there most of the time. When I was working in the oil patch, I interacted with all mostly Canadians, some other nationalities. But what I observe is that it's more your co-immigrant that exercise the anti-racism, maybe because of the competitiveness. They're afraid that you are also trying to take their job, and you are both struggling to keep your jobs. But I'm in that film, though, I was thinking, that lady, when she came in and she was quiet, right? She just lashed out at the guy without any premonition, just like that. That's really...
Yes, the incident was unprovoked. Often people are incited into almost hysterical fear, resentment, anger, scapegoating to different minority groups. And that was the case where she, unprompted, without provocation, in Andy's own store, where she thought she could, on behalf of herself and whoever she represented, take it out on Andy.
Maybe she has something in her mind, because a normal person usually doesn't just lash out at somebody they don't know.
I think as
without
mentioned,
provocation.
right. Yeah, I think as mentioned in the film, I think the social political context also adds to the situation, right? The current situation that I think people with racist ideas have been emboldened, by some of the leaders on this continent to actually now directly and aggressively express those racist attitudes and beliefs. So I think thank you for your point about pointing out the differences between direct and aggressive racist treatments versus some of the microaggressions that I think that in general we're becoming more aware of, that we are actually more ready to actually point out and challenge.
Teresa, may I comment on one of
yes,
her
please.
components? Actually, when I was quite interested in your comment when you said your observation is that it's other minority groups fighting amongst each other. And I just want to maybe comment on that from the perspective of how we've observed how racism is an instrument for division. And it's typically a tool to have different groups, suppressed groups or minority groups, interfight when a lot of their issues around inequity are very similar. And I think one of the takeaways of this film is really around we need solidarity amongst those minority groups, those ones also facing injustice or inequity, because if we're fighting among ourselves, those who hold the power or who are in the suppressive positions are not being held accountable. So it's an important lesson to walk away that an attack against one minority group is often an attack against all minority groups. It is a power structure issue. It is not amongst race. Race is the tool to create division.
And one tip I find quite effective, personally, I think if we have that empowerment within us, that we have an equal right as that person who is talking to us. We all have rights. And as they say, bad things happen to you if you allow it. So you have to speak out. You have to articulate in a diplomatic way, maybe not in, because it has to show that you are still in control of your mind, not just with your emotion. So you will have that power within you to speak out and maybe lessen the tension with a firm but gentle voice to affirm that I also have rights as you do. So don't treat me that way. I don't want to be treated that way because I don't treat you that way.
Well, thank you, Dolly, for those sharing those insights and wisdom as a leader in the Calgary community, and reinforcing the importance of empowering ourselves and each other, and know our rights, and also exercise our rights, including speaking out. Do we have another speaker? Oh. Thank you, Stephanie.
Oh, that's allowed. Hi, I'm Eugene. Can I take, oh, hello, that's my friend right here. Can I just talk more about, like, when you see same say something, but also I would like to address the part, sometimes we grow up in here. I've been living in this Calgary for like 8 years, but sometimes the way people like talk to me, especially non-Asian people, like talk to me, address me in the environment, sometimes it's not just really empowering or encouraging to me. Sometimes I don't really feel like welcome. So it's not just about like, oh yeah, you didn't say it, you are not equipped to say it, or it's just, sometimes we just been like taught to not speak up, or we just been encouraged for such a long time to not to speak up. So there's so many layers to why we didn't speak up or report the situation, because sometimes we just felt like, oh yeah, we have to be successful. Nobody can target us, nobody can attack us, nobody, like we cannot be in poverty, etc. But there's so many different things that affect us. Racial bias is one thing, minority myth is one thing, but at the end of the day, there's so many things that dehumanize us. So yeah, I don't know how to wrap it up, but yeah, take it away.
Well, thank you for sharing. I think you helped to point out some of the ongoing challenges and barriers that we still see from our own the Asian Canadian communities. We have cultural practices that is not actually supporting us to confront the issues, address the issue. You said that you don't feel equipped, and that's why the Act to End Racism Network developed and posted the Dr. Ishiyama's anti-discrimination witness training program. So what he developed was some cue cards to help people to practice, so that because sometimes when we experience a racist incident, that we are in such shock that we may not know, we don't feel equipped to respond. So there are tools like that we have put together to help the community to gain the capacity to respond. So thank you for pointing that out and sharing your perspective and experience. So at this point, I'm going to invite another panelist to share. Cesar Cala, a settler from the Philippines, is known for his extensive experiences in community development, social innovation, popular education, coalition building, and social advocacy. Cesar is involved with and have helped build a number of organizations in Calgary, and I have had the great privilege to have, how long have I known? Too long, very long, before we have grandkids. So, but I have learned so much from Cesar, and so I'm so very pleased that he's taking time to come to participate today. And so he is currently playing a key role with an entity called Filipino Rising. So Cesar, please, given your extensive involvement, and not only with the fast-growing Filipino-Canadian community, but also with many marginalized populations, all with distinct needs and experiences, please share with us thoughts that you have that was invoked by the film, What Flowers They Bloom.
I wrote a few random themes, and let's see how we can weave them together. I'll just throw them out anyway. One is during the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that in any crisis, and this was a huge crisis at various levels, there's already an inequity happening in our midst, in our society. And crisis really brings these inequities to the fore, right? Highlights them and starkly shows them to us. So in our case, in the Filipino community, one of the largest outbreak happened at the meat packing plant. Probably people know that already. In Cargill, more than 900 workers, a lot of them Filipinos, were infected by COVID-19. And the first pronouncements from the provincial government was mainly to blame the workers. That because of their practices, that's why infection was happening and spreading. So practices like car sharing and sharing houses, right? So in one house, for instance, there would be 18 workers and so on. And so, but then you get to ask, why does this happen anyway? And from the film, I like that comment that it's not only the shark that is racist, it's the water that is racist. And for me, the issue in Cargill uncovers many of these water issues. Why are many workers why do workers, many of them need to share housing situations, right? Because many of them were temporary foreign workers. They were not living with their families. They had to live with others, right? And they had to stay in Cargill because their visa allows them only to work in one place. They cannot work in other places. That smacks of modern slavery for me, right? But in any way, so therefore, they're more vulnerable then to stay put and not to question what is happening in the workplace, right? So these are some of the water issues that we need to look at, right? The shark issues are there, like many of the workers, when they went out and had to go to groceries and banks, many of them were harassed because they were workers from Cargill, right? So I'm really interested in that issue. The other thing that I was writing here is that, again, this is a forum about anti-Asian racism. The issue of Asian is very interesting because as Filipinos, right, we come from the Asian continent, but we also are quite distinct from other Asian communities as well as Koreans and so on. So Asian is not a monolithic term, right? And we need to be really keen on understanding the peculiarities and the specifics of our own historical experiences so that from there we could actually build solidarity, right? And so one of the things that is the running thread of the Asian communities in Canada is that we have been essential workers for centuries, right? The Chinese workers, railroad workers, the South Asian farm workers and the Japanese farm workers, the Filipino temporary foreign workers and health workers. We are at the forefront of the essential things in Canada. So we are put there up front when things happen as in crisis situations. We are the ones bearing the brunt. And COVID-19 has really shown that, right? But here's the thing, though. We have always been seen as with other racialized communities as foreign, right? Even Andy, who's third generation, a lot of people still see him as foreign, right? COVID-19 is foreign. Temporary foreign workers. See the thread, right? When you see something foreign, what do? You try to kick the foreign thing out, whether that's a virus or things that look foreign to you, right? And the water still exists because, 2006 was the apology for the Chinese Exclusion Act and the head tax. 2016 was the Canadian apology for the incidents of the Komagata Maru. I think in 2046, the Canadian government will apologize to the Filipino temporary foreign workers. Which means that our exclusionary waters, the systems of our exclusionary waters still exist to this day. What are we doing about it? Right? So for me, racism is put into place and continues to be put into place by coercion and by consent. We see the things that are coercive, like violent acts and aggressive acts. We do not see the consent, but we consent to racism to continue in our midst through the waters of public systems and policy, right? Our education curriculum, our waters, and what do they conjure? What do they encourage in terms of culture, right? In 2007, Canada actually gave out more visas to temporary people. That was the inflection time. Before, Canada was giving visas to those who have a clear path towards citizenship, right? 2007 until now, more and more visas are being provided to foreign people. Some of them may have pathways to becoming fully citizen and shed their foreignness, at least in the official terms, right? But more and more are becoming what they call permanently temporary, right? So what I'm saying is that it's very good to have a historical sweep of these policies, like the Chinese Exclusion Act and all the other exclusionary acts. But let us not be deluded that those do not exist anymore. They do.
Thank you.
Minus the sharpness of it, though. So that's our challenge, though, is that how can we start working together across histories and across communities so that we actually build the solidarity that we need to change the water in our seas, in our lakes. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Cesar. So thank you for raising the point about the need to, I think, apply some contextual analysis to this situation, such as have an analysis, examination, greater understanding on the diversity and complexity of the Asian Canadians. Because Asian Canadian is a very broad term. And so currently, the federal government is reviewing the Employment Equity Act, and I had the opportunity to participate in a consultation session. And so I had the opportunity to raise the issue that Japanese Canadian, Chinese Canadian have very different experiences and needs. From the Filipino Canadians and the Vietnamese Canadians and Korean Canadians, so different analysis and understanding and different solutions are needed. And you reminded us about the essential workers. Look at the essential workers who were recognized and celebrated, but the Canadians in general gained a better understanding on we have essential workers who came out of their workplace and experienced discrimination and mistreatment. And different essential workers in this country have had different experiences and different treatments. So thank you for raising some of those points.
Teresa,
Cesar.
may I comment on a message?
Yes, 3 minutes, my friend.
So
Because we're
I'm gonna
now
keep it. I'm gonna
7:20.
keep it tight, though.
Yes.
Keep it tight. One of the things that really resonated was when you said, "Oh, when the outbreak happened, it was the workers that were blamed for their practices." And one of the strategies around controlling that negative is that the employer takes no accountability for unsafe working. And so we've seen that. I'm doing another documentary on vaccine hesitancy. We're analyzing the impact of marginalized communities who are often in roles as essential workers, frontline healthcare workers. And a lot of that blame is shifted to divert attention, blame, focus on the worker as opposed to the employer that is responsible for those workers' environments. So again, it's an important thing to reflect upon on how those narratives are used to divide, to create blame, and to shift focus away from the accountability of who has power and who has responsibility. And it's very easy to pin that on an immigrant population, a minority population that does not have that power. So that's my comment on it. Thank you for stimulating that, Cesar.
Thank you. I see Cam has his hand up.
Sorry if I could make one quick comment as well.
Okay. Okay, Gabriel, go ahead, and then Cam.
So what Cesar has said about our immigration system is very true. So I'm a lawyer at a free legal clinic. I supervise our immigration team. There is very little that we are able to do if employers are exploiting their temporary foreign workers, and that happens a lot. The whole system is designed to give the employer a lot of power and leave the employee essentially at their mercy. It's very ripe for exploitation. And our immigration legislation and sort of sub-rules change all the time. It's very confusing. And it really is something that is at the heart of it, just entrenches the power that we've talked about, that gatekeeps and forces the less desirable foreigners, because we're all foreigner. Well, most of us are foreigners, except for there's people in or out of the country, are sort of at having this threat of not being able to say or having to go back dangled over your head. But anyway.
Thank you, Gabriel, for adding that perspective. Cam?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I really appreciate everyone's perspective and really enjoyed and empathetic towards the people who were involved with the video and the constant racism that the Asian community has. I represent the Alberta Human Rights Commission and have been involved in this area for about 20 years, and it's interesting and sad to see that racism and discrimination is consistent in our province and in our country, and it just changes the victimization changes week to week, day to day. And what we saw here during COVID, how it shifted to the Asian community, to the Filipino community across our province, and the numbers of complaints that came into law enforcement or the Human Rights Commission increased towards those communities being victimization. We saw the same thing during 9/11, how people of Arab descent or people who looked like they were Arab descent, how they were victims of discrimination, whether it was through their coworkers, whether it was through their management. And we saw a lot of that during COVID. We saw employees, we saw people going for service, whether at a grocery store, being victimized or being refused service by restaurants, or being asked, hey, can you show us your COVID, your thing, when that wasn't what stores were asked for, but some stores asked for that from some Filipino members and some people from Chinese descent. So it pains me that this continues, and I think as I think Cesar alluded to, is that we have to be resilient and we have to work against all forms of discrimination towards ever it happens, because we saw this phase during COVID against the Asian community, and we'll see another phase down the road against another community, and then it'll come back to them where it's the Asian community. So I think it's something that we have to be resilient as Canadians, as allies, and as edgewalkers, that we move our systems and that we all keep available. And I think, as Rosalind said, that if we're not impacted by it, we can still be an active bystander or an upstander, and what can we do about it? So I think that we can all learn through this, and hopefully when the next wave comes against any of us or any of our communities, that we can stand up and stand tall.
Thank you, Cam. Thank you for raising the issue about the need for systemic change. And as someone who have worked in the community and in this area for 4 decades, I think this is actually one of the best time for us to actually to talk about the need for systemic change. And so thank you for that, and also reinforcing the importance of allyship. You've been a great ally to many of the racialized communities here in Calgary, Cam. But I would also like to share that the part about the butcher, that was very powerful. My first 2 viewing of this, I did not pay as much attention, but actually when I watched it again 2 days ago, I really appreciated that segment. It talks about individual power. It talks about the power of community, and it instantaneously gave me a sense of hope. So thank you for including that, Calvin. So now I would like to move on to the next panelist, Gabriel, lawyer who practiced in the public interest arena with experience in issues of discrimination and civil rights, working with low-income, homeless, and other marginalized groups for over 16 years. So given your extensive work with many marginalized populations on a daily basis, Gabriel, any particular aspects of the film that sort of spoke to you that you would like to comment on?
Thank you, Teresa. So as you mentioned, there are these important moments when, there might be bystanders or people in the community that are witnessing things, and we really need people to, as we've said, be allies, to stand up. I remember during the pandemic, I was at the Superstore right down from here, and there was a cashier who was just trying to do her job and, tell a customer at the checkout that she needs to put her mask on. The woman appeared European, and she started talking in a way that was very similar to Andy's customer, where she was saying, I'm not going to have my freedom constrained by a Chinese virus. And I mean, I felt so terrible for this cashier, but in that moment, there was nothing that I could do, because as a visibly Asian person, to come to her aid would have only reinforced that woman's perception of what was going on. So what we needed were probably people of her own race telling her you're being a bigot, stop it, or something to that effect. Um, pardon me. And sort of building on what Rosalind was speaking of, it is important as well that we report when things are like that are happening. You can do it anonymously, or you can do it in a way that doesn't draw a lot of attention to yourself. But it's important for a couple of reasons. The first thing is that, you know, for public bodies, institutions, things like that, and other social groups to be able to meaningfully respond, we need to know what's happening in order to create a meaningful response. I work for a charity. We apply for grants. We need to be able to show like what it is that our work is needed to do and how it is that we have an impact. So it's important for that reason. When we're working in the legal system, if we're trying to hold people accountable for breaking the law, then we need to have a sense of like, what impact is this having on society? And as I'll talk about, the legal system is a very imprecise tool, but we want to try and make it as good as we can. And it is important, it's crucial for us to have data. So you can do it in a way that makes you feel safe, but it's important that you do it. So something that really struck me in the film is when Dr. Hwang's talking about his mental health clinic that is serving Chinese Canadians, and it quickly gets labeled by his superiors as a high-risk clinic, simply because they are serving Chinese people. As if somehow other people aren't, you know, traveling to and from China, one of the largest economies in the world, having constant contact, you know, with others. It's somehow only the Chinese people. And this is in law what we call adverse or constructive effect discrimination. So it's something that looks neutral on its face. It has the effect of singling out a particular group for negative treatment. And so that's also the kind of language that we see used when you talk about high crime risk neighborhoods, and it somehow always happens to be the neighborhoods with people who tend to have darker skin. So again, remembering that we have to be allies to each other. So it's reciprocal. We support each other, you know, as people of color, or kinds of communities. It's important. And I think it illustrates what Dr. Logie talks about when she mentions like swimming in this sea of racism, because the legal system, it's a system, and so it has a lot of shortcomings and a lot of gaps and problems. And there are ways for us to challenge adverse discrimination, subconscious bias, or things like hate crimes through that. But the truth is that even people with a lot of privilege often do not find that experience to be very satisfying. It's only much more recently that leaders in legal systems are acknowledging that often we fall short of actually delivering justice for people. And so we refer to it as what it is, a legal system. And so we're doing things now to try and address those power imbalances. But we have to remember at the end of the day, every system is limited in what it is that we can do, and something that is now emerging in recognition of this and helping to address that is something called transformative justice. And one of the things I think we can be really proud of is that in the world, some of the real leadership on this is actually from Toronto. So it is from people of color groups in the GTA, particularly Black women, that are the real leaders in this movement. So the problem comes from there. The solution is also coming there. It's a beautiful thing. And so what's happening is that when people are experiencing injustice, safety issues, things like that, they're coming together and they're figuring out ways in their neighborhoods and people groups and things like that to be able to address that, pardon me, themselves. Because, you know, we saw in the film, Andy suffers this horrible experience. unfortunately, it's not one that likely our legal system would be able to address in a very meaningful way for him. The first thing is that from what he described, what she said probably wouldn't meet the criminal definition of a threat. And even if a civil court were to find that she harmed Andy and ordered that she pay him, I mean, I don't know Andy, but I'm not sure if that would have necessarily made him feel a lot better. You know, I'm often consulting with and advising people on things like that and the limits of what the legal system can do. And that's something that comes up a lot. And that's where things like transformative justice come in, is people finding ways to, excuse me, to provide justice for each other. And that's what it is that we saw in the film. That's what you said, Teresa. We see the people in Andy's neighborhood talking about this discrimination on their local Facebook page. And then David, the restaurant owner, offers free burgers to the customers of Andy's flower shop. So the folks there they saw an issue, but they didn't try and fit it into our formal systems, which people often describe as like trying to get a square peg into a round hole. They found ways to educate and support each other, their peers that needed help. And they created what Andy himself described as a healing experience for him, using their own resources, their businesses, their dollars. And so that's something that we can remember that is within our own power. And that's something that we can always be looking for and to do for each other.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you for raising helping us understand that in addition to individual action, building out the capacity of our community, empowering our community to respond and to address these issues, some additional ways. So potential, using alternative, I guess, legal instruments or ways to possibly address some of these issues. I trust that that many of you agree that the film really help people like myself who are trying to increase the awareness and understanding of the experience and impact of racism for our own community, because so many people in our own community actually do not fully understand what constitutes, how discrimination, racism is manifested in this country, even though they may be experiencing it. And so the film certainly, is helping to convey that message to a broader Canadian society that about the real harm that racism and discrimination can impact people's well-being, and to me, even more important, our sense of belonging. So, I started doing this work in the 1980s, 1990s, my third round of EDI, but I still feel, and so many of you are working, day in, day out, year after year on addressing these issues. But when I look at my grandchildren, I do not feel that I have done enough. And I do not feel that our system actually is protecting them the way I want, so that they would not experience what Andy experienced in the film, what Rosalind and Gabriel experienced. And so I think sharing some of these different ways to address the issue have been hopefully helpful today. And then the need to acknowledge the inadequacies in our system, to raise issues of power imbalance, not issues that we talk about in our communities often enough. So thank you for raising that, Gabriel. Anyone else on the panel would like to add your comment on this? Yeah, Rosalind.
Can you hear me? So I'm with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. I'm the Western Regional Coordinator for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And we are a federal government Crown corporation under the Department of Canadian Heritage, and our sole focus really is the elimination of racism and racial discrimination. And what I wanted to kind of, talk a little bit about what Gabriel was talking about in terms of the difference between hate crimes and hate incidences. And I know what we saw in the film would have been classified as a hate incident. And even though we still encourage people to report that, some of the work that we do at the Canadian Race Relations Foundation is looking at some of that systemic change and looking at changes in policy and practices. We have a hate crimes task force that our executive director sits on with the Chiefs of Police Roundtable and the RCMP. And the focus right now of that task force is looking at improving the training and reporting of hate crimes in policing, because there are various police jurisdictions across the country who may report hate crimes differently and may not even note an incident as a hate crime sometimes until maybe the community advocates for it or the victim says, I felt like that or I perceived that that was an actual hate crime. And so some of that doesn't get documented or prosecuted, and it is prosecuted differently when it is noted as a hate crime. And so it's important for us as a community to learn about those differences. And a hate crime is a criminal offense under the criminal code, and it includes things like a physical assault. And some people think, well, does that include spitting or coughing? Yes, it does. It includes also acts of vandalism. It includes, promoting genocide. And hate incidents, on the other hand, are like, racial slurs that we saw, the verbal harassment that people experience. And even though that can't be prosecuted, we still want that to be reported, just because we know that hate incidents and people who commit those acts sometimes escalate that to a hate crime. And so I was talking to somebody in our policy department today, and they were saying, and gave me an example that something like intimidation may start off as a hate incident. Somebody may say to you, well, you don't belong here. But then if somebody wants to escalate that, they can say, or you don't belong here, get out of my face. If you don't, I'm going to break your leg. They're uttering a threat to you. So that it can escalate. And so that's why we encourage that type of reporting. Regardless of whether it's a hate crime or a hate incident, we know the impact and the emotional stressor and the psychological trauma is still the same. Hate crimes and hate incidences are a message crime. They're a message to a community to tell them you don't belong here. And so, I just want to share some of that work that we are doing around systemic change. We're also looking at providing supports for victims of hate. We've done extensive research in that area, and we're looking and advocating for funding for community organizations so that they can get additional funds to provide supports and center that work around supporting victims as well. So, and just to end off with one last analogy, because I really like the ocean and the water analogy, and I thought of that too. That was one of the things that struck me. But I think about a phrase that I often think about is, and it's from a quote from Rumi, who's a Sufi poet, and he says, "You are not a drop in the ocean; you are entire ocean in a drop." And I think for us, it's like, we all have a responsibility. We all play a part in the ecosystem. And so I think, the question is, what is your part and what is the power that you have to enact change?
Well, thank you, Rosalind. That's a great segue. You'll get. I'm coming to you. So, about our responsibility, and I think that. I think one of the things that's happening is I think that different panelists and also audience have been reinforcing, what we can do individually, as a community systems. And so I would like to now, we're doing relatively well with time. would like to invite some of the ACCT and the Act to End Racism Network partners to speak a little bit about their work and their efforts, how they employ culturally relevant ways to support the community during time of challenge and facing issues that our community have perhaps not faced the same way before. So we do have Cesar with Filipino Rising. We have members of the Korean Women Association. We have someone from, I think, is she still here? From the Vietnamese Women Association? Maybe not. So with a grant during the pandemic from the Red Cross, I think, and also the federal government, ACCT actually used that grant and gave support to the Korean Women Association, the Vietnamese Women Association, and Filipino Rising, recognizing the diversity and complexity of the different communities, that our work is really to share our resources so that we can meet individual community needs. So I'm going to give each community 2 minutes. Cesar. So Anna's here if you'd like to share, and Lori, and I don't know whether we still have the Vietnamese Women Association here to share some of the work that you do, some of the ways, unique ways, like Cesar, you employ to inform, raise awareness, and engage our community to talk about the difficult subject of racism and mental health. So start with you, Cesar.
Maybe I'll just highlight a couple of initiatives we were part of during COVID. We talked about the blaming of the essential workers, right? That seems to be what's happening. So we worked with a number of racialized community organizations and also with Action Dignity, where we flipped it around. What we did was we created a hotline where if you're infected with COVID, you could call a hotline and you could speak to someone in your first language. And then get support that are more appropriate to what you were needing and also culturally relevant and culturally healing. But what we did first was to train all the volunteers who were part of this initiative that when they talk to someone who was infected, the first thing that they should do is to thank them for the work that they do. A word of gratitude first before the service. That because you are an essential worker working in the front lines, you put yourself at risk, and we are thanking you for that. Right? So it really shifted the narrative around. Secondly is that we work closely with a lot of artists in our communities, and through the technology of Zoom and other virtual platforms, we were able to have a series of interactions we called Healing Together in Dignity. Right? So we had a lot of essential workers who were artists. So we had musicians and dramatists and poets and so on. And then so we created an actual process of understanding our shared experiences. And through the healing and empowering platforms of arts and expression, we were able to work with various members of our communities. I think what I was going to add to what Rosalind was saying is that we all have our own spheres of influence, right? Whether in our neighborhood, in our networks as artists. I see people from CBC, for instance, that's your sphere of influence. So how can we then start to address some of these inequities through the work that we do and the connections that we make? The other thing is that remember when we organized 2 minutes, last 2 one, seconds. 2 seconds. But when we organized that march against anti-Asian hate at the Peace Bridge, we actually reached out to members of the indigenous communities and also some of the organizers of Black Lives Matter, right, to co-plan. It was an eye-opener because we found out we were not actually speaking with each other in a sustained way,
Thank you, Cesar.
right? So we need to do that more.
Yes. So I don't know whether some of the committee member wishes to share at this point in time. I'd just like to take the opportunity to talk about a slight regional issue. In Alberta, Kevin, unlike in Toronto, we don't have culture-specific services for mental health. In fact, your film reminded me, in the early 1990s, I was trained to provide training to United Way-funded agencies. And I had the opportunity to do some training with those who are in the mental health sector. Someone actually in the training said, you Chinese people must have some ancient formula that you don't have mental health needs and issues. She said that in front of my face. So during anti-discrimination training. So anyways, but today we still do not have a lot of culturally relevant, culturally sensitive mental health services in Calgary for being the third most racially diverse city in the country. So anyone at this point? If not, I'm going to invite others to speak. I would like to acknowledge someone mentioned that how Asian, more so Chinese Canadian these days, we are at risk groups. We are high-risk groups. So I was working very intensely the past 9 months to have our public institutions become aware and commemorate the centenary of the Chinese Exclusion Act. In that process, I was met with people who are open and supportive, and I also have met with people who wanted to stay away from anything to do with Chinese in this country with a 10-foot pole. So, but I'd like to say that our city of Calgary was an exception to that. I had the great opportunity to work with our city of Calgary and to receive tremendous support to raise awareness about this important historical chapter in Canada and the continued effect of exclusionary acts to not only Chinese Canadians, but to many other racialized communities today. So I don't know whether, Linda, I'm putting you on the spot, if you would like to share and speak and perhaps share your perspective on the film today and the subject matter. Linda is at the very back. You think you can hide from us, Linda?
I really tried. I even told my teammate Jeremy I'm gonna hide back here, so it didn't work. Thank you so much, Teresa, and everybody from the planning committee who put this together. I could not keep my tears in watching the experiences on screen. And so some people might think, that's just a video, that's just one person experience. But we know that the 40+% of Indigenous, Black, and diverse racialized peoples who live in Calgary, who live in Canada, experience quite a bit. So at the City of Calgary, we just launched our strategic plan. And it isn't a plan that needs to be shelved. It is something that we hope and we're working on tirelessly to ensure that anti-racism actions are implemented, that the community feels supported, not only with words, but financially, and also walking alongside. So thank you for a very successful evening. I'm really looking forward, Teresa, to continue working with you and the community and to ensure that we become a city where people want to move in because they feel safe and they feel like their dignity is taken into consideration in workplaces, in the community, and that they can walk with their heads held up high, and the experiences that Asian Canadians have gone through, that can become something of the past. And our youngsters, the children to be, can see that the work that has been done for decades is paying off, and we will not stop until every child in this city feels like they can walk, they can drive without being targeted by anybody. So that's what I would like to share.
Well, thank you, Linda, for sharing. You know, I know that we still have a long way to go, a long road ahead to reach full, equity and inclusion. But we are making really good stride. You know, I used to go to Eastern Canada and get energized and come back. And I feel that we are always behind. But you know what? I don't feel that right now about Calgary. So I'm very pleased to share with you, Calvin. Someone mentioned artists. And we have Helen here from the Calgary Arts Development. And, oh yeah, Cesar mentioned it. And they have actually undertaken an institutional change initiative for well over 5 years. And institutional change is governance, operation, funding, and everything is all encompassing. And they have been supporting a lot of the work done by the Korean Art Club and the Filipino community and other communities. So would you like to share your thoughts, Helen?
I'll just say a very short message that tonight is an example of how artists can lead the way in telling our stories. Oh, I always think I have a big voice.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you everyone on the panel. I will just say that our leader, Patty Pon, is a great advocate for inclusion and accessibility, and that this film tonight to me was a living example of how artists can lead the way in not only telling our stories, but in modeling a more inclusive and equitable society for everyone. So thank you so much, Calvin, and everyone here, Teresa.
Thank you. Anyone else? We're doing okay with time. So if not, I'm going to turn the floor over just for a minute to the great storyteller who brought us together here today, Calvin Hwang, to make your last comment, if you wish.
I think one of the key things that I was so aware of when addressing an issue like racism is to ensure that we not only have an acknowledgement of what individuals that encounter this type of inequity and discrimination, but it was really, really important to leave a message of positive community action and show a real example across communities where we're able to build those bridges and stand up collectively against racism and inequity. And I thought, one of the, I mentioned this in Edmonton, one of the things I was worried about was, am I helping to promote another great white savior narrative with David being someone who brought a lot of healing and awareness and engagement through the community. And I think it's an important message to remember that racism is not just one community. It is a structural issue of inequity. And whether it shifts from one incidence, say the pandemic, where Asians are targeted, or shifts to another incidence where the members of the Black community are targeted, it is important to remember we're not fighting for our race to become dominant in a broken structure. We're fighting for equity across all people and trying to repair a structure that systemically places inequity as a foundation to its structure. So the solidarity message is so important to me, and I hope that resonates for all of you, that we can all be partners with every other community, and that any act of racism is an attack on our equity as people. So it's so, so important, and I hope through this work I was somewhat successful in bringing that hope and that inspiration to the community. So I very much thank everyone, Teresa, the panel, and all the organizations that have supported this event to help bring this into the community where hopefully it can make a real powerful impact for everyone. So thank you so much. And I hope you can walk away as a partner in fighting racism with us.
Thank you. So ACCT Foundation look forward to working with you to continue to try to get these kind of educational resources into our systems. Because right now our systems are not aware of all these great resources being developed, so it's been an interesting challenge for us. So with that, I'd like to extend our gratitude to our project funders, the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, the Government of Alberta Multiculturalism and Anti-Racism Grant, project partners SUPRE, and the Calgary Korean Women Association, Anna Cole, and Lori Tran are here today. The team from ACCT comprised of William Lau from Edmonton, Jennifer Lee, Shirley Wu, Kin Chu, and Susan Lau. Thank you for your support. And thank you to all of you for coming and contributing to this important discussion on addressing anti-Asian hate. I look forward to reconnecting with all of you in the future and continue to work together to address equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. Please do go to our website to learn more about some of the resources that is free for all of you to use. So with that, enjoy the rest of the summer, the rest of the evening. Thank you so much for your participation and support today. Good night. And it's 8 p.m. Thank you.